Good morning, everyone. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. We are just so thrilled and excited for today's events. I'm Shannon Hayter. I'm the Dean of our School of International Service, and it is really my pleasure to welcome our esteemed guest and all of you today. As many of you know, SIS, the School of International Service, we're not just the School of International Studies. We were founded in 1957 and given a charge to wage peace, with the idea that waging peace is much more than just the absence of war. It is the actions we take and stand up for and do every day to try to make the human condition better, positively impact humanity. And that's not always easy. It's often the story of struggle. And I think today we are going to be able to get some insights about bravery and principle and people and the things that champions all around do to make the world a better place. So let me introduce my colleague, Professor Keith Darden, who will lead our discussion with our distinguished guests. Professor Darden's research focuses on nationalism, state building, and the politics of Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia. He's written extensively, including an award-winning book, Economic Liberalism and Its Rivals, and has another book coming out soon, Resisting Occupation in Eurasia. His analysis and interviews concerning the events in Ukraine have been published widely in leading newspapers and publications, and he's appeared on numerous major media outlets. Thank you, Keith, for moderating today. And now to our distinguished guests. We welcome Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya. She is the national leader of Belarus and the head of the United Transition Cabinet. Independent observers agree she won the presidential election on August 9th, 2020, against the dictator Alexander Lukashenka. And I have to say, I was in Belarus in, I think, September or October of 2019. The thing I carried away the most from my visit were many of our young tour guides who are recent university graduates. And it was clear at the time, even as a UN visitor, that this was a generation that was looking for something new and looking for change. So as a leader of the Belarus democratic movement, she's visited 28 countries, advocating for the release of more than 1,500 political prisoners and a peaceful transition of power through free and fair elections. She entered the race after her husband, Sergei, was arrested for voicing his presidential aspirations. Lukashenko publicly dismissed her as a housewife, saying that a woman can't become president. And yet, here she is. She's united and successfully led the Democratic Coalition. And following her forced exile, she's inspired unprecedented peaceful protests in Belarus, with rallies numbering hundreds of thousands of people. In 2022 to 2023, she became a symbol of the peaceful struggle for democracy and strong female leadership. Among dozens of distinctions, she is a recipient of the Sakharov Prize awarded by the European Parliament, the 2022 International Four Freedoms Award, and the Charlemagne Prize, and has been nominated twice for the Nobel Peace Prize. She has been recognized in Bloomberg's top 50 most influential people, the Financial Times' top 12 most influential women, and Political's top 28 most influential Europeans. So thank you again for taking the time to be with us today. Huge thanks also to our distinguished SIS alumni, Franek Viachorka, Senior Advisor to the President-Elect, to Raman Milky and our Slavic Studies Student Association, and to faculty Michelle Egan and Garrett Martin for bringing this opportunity to partner with the Student Association to us. And I've been asked to remind you all for the Slavic Studies Student Association that tomorrow from 2:30 to 4:30 in this room, we will also have the ambassador from the Republic of Poland to the US here for a discussion as well. So with that, over to you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean Hayter. And I think we're going to start with some comments from the President-elect, from Sviatlana, and then she and I will have a brief exchange. And since we have such a wonderful audience, I think we'll open it up as soon as possible to questions from the floor. So if you would, go ahead.
Yeah.
You may, yeah.
Well, good morning, dear students of American University. dear Dean Shannon Hyder, dear Professor Keith Darden. It's a privilege and honor to speak at this prestigious school. And honestly speaking, I'm always nervous when I meet students because you never know what question to expect. Exactly 60 years ago, President John Kennedy arrived here at the campus of American University to deliver a speech that could change the course of the history. His speech marked the beginning of the end of the Cold War. He called for nuclear disarmament because he realized that without peace, the future of the entire planet will be at risk. The biggest threat back then was Russia's imperial ambitions. 60 years after that speech, the biggest threat to world peace is again Russia. Since Kennedy's speech, the Kremlin is once again taking the world to the brink. Just a few days ago, Putin announced that Russia is planning to deploy nuclear weapons in my country, Belarus, and threatening regional peace in the region and the world beyond. Although Putin's tyranny violates the Belarusian constitution and its non-nuclear status, he behaves with the arrogance of Russian leaders before him, treating Belarus, a sovereign country, like personal property. For over 200 years, Russia has been trying to wipe Belarus off the map. Our borders, our language, our culture, and our art, the very roots of our society have been attacked by the cancer of Russian ambition. Firstly, at the end of the 18th century, we were swallowed by the Russian Empire. Then the Soviet Union subjugated us. And for the last 28 years, we have been in the grip of the neo-Soviet tyrant, Putin's puppet, Alexander Lukashenka. The disgraced former President Lukashenka has kept Belarus behind the Iron Curtain, and he continues to terrorize Belarusian people and abuse human rights. He is stealing the wealth of the nation, its present and its future. After 3 decades of tyranny, Belarusians went to the polls, and in 2020, they voted him out. But he refused to leave office, and with the support of Putin and violence, he cracked down on peaceful protests. I was just one of the millions of ordinary Belarusians who stand against Lukashenka and his master in the Kremlin. I wasn't even in politics before 2020. I was a housewife raising 2 kids when my husband stood for elections. He wanted a better life for Belarusians, but the regime threw him in jail for 19.5 years. I stood for election instead of him, and regime allowed me to do. They even tried to humiliate me, making a joke that there is no place in our politics for women. But their joke backfired. I won the election. Lukashenko got scared and forced me to leave the country. He threatened me and my children. But in exile, I continued my work for freedom and democracy. And I know it's only temporary. Our goal is to return home and conduct free and fair elections in Belarus. With the beginning of the war in Ukraine, things got even more complicated. Lukashenko enabled Putin's war against Ukraine. He has allowed Russia to occupy Belarus. Russian soldiers, tanks, and planes are all over our territory. Probably soon there will be nuclear weapons too. The very existence of Belarus as independent state is under threat now. It becomes evident that Russia doesn't intend to stop on Ukraine or Belarus. It will be threatening the entire Europe. This is why the speech that John Kennedy made here has never been more relevant. It is impossible to partially stop the empire. It can only be stopped in a radical and uncompromising way, all at the same time. And this is what we must do urgently. And you are, my dear students, the torch bearers of John Kennedy's ideals. You are the brightest minds and the future top-level experts in international politics. You will influence how the world sees and deals with Eastern Europe, once again the epicenter of the world's attention. How the situation in our region evolves in the next few years will impact the entire world. United States, Europe, China, is everywhere. John Kennedy knew that no one can beat tyranny and injustice on their own. No one can challenge an empire without allies and solidarity. Therefore, we need you, our friends. Be the champions of freedom and democracy. Stand for democratic values and peace. Don't make compromises with tyranny and injustice. Don't let Russian aggression take Europe into darkness again. We Belarusians understand the price of freedom. We pay it every day. Freedom and democracy are very easy to lose, and once gone, they are very hard to get back. Much of the West took this for granted. So I'm telling you now, cherish what you have and be ready to fight and defend it forever. Long live Belarus and Slava Ukraini.
Thank you very much. If I could start by walking us back in time a bit. At the School of International Service, one of the things that we look at closely is pro-democracy movements. And in many ways, the movement that you led in Belarus is the model of how those movements should work. It was very widespread in its popular support. You got thousands, hundreds of thousands of people out onto the streets on a regular, consistent basis over a period of months. The opposition was quite unified. You created early on a coordinating council with lots of Belarusian elites. You were focused on a concrete task, which is just the simple goal of holding a free and fair election and recognizing the results of that election. But it's somewhat disturbing for those of us who study this process because it wasn't successful in ousting the dictator Alexander Lukashenka. So I'm wondering if, looking back on it, you could give us some insights about what might have been, is there anything that might have been done differently? Or is it just trying to overthrow a dictator who's been in power for close to 30 years is a high risk and low probability endeavor regardless? And there's nothing that could have been done differently either by the Belarusian opposition or by us here in the West. I'm just curious for your thoughts on what might maybe have been done differently or what we might do differently going forward if we want to see a movement like that come again on Belarusian soil.
People of Belarus in 2020 were ready for changes. We wanted to bring our country to democratic future, and Lukashenko was the person who didn't take care about people, about country, who was taking care only about his personal power. And maybe in 2020 we underestimated the cruelty of this regime and underestimated the plans of Russia on Belarus, because we remember that Lukashenko in 2020 managed to stay in power only thanks to violence and thanks to support of Putin. Now, looking back, I think that even if our wonderful, powerful uprising managed to get rid of the regime of Lukashenko, Putin's army would come to rescue him. But I don't think that our uprising lost, because for 2.5 years, we are managing to keep Lukashenko in stress. Our peaceful people, they make Lukashenko behave as if still hundreds of thousands of people are staying in front of his palace. He understands that he managed to suppress uprising, managed to suppress like visible resilience, but he didn't manage to change set of mind of people. He knows that society is boiling, and if new window of opportunity appears in Belarus, we will see again this huge rallies in Belarus. We will see huge different acts of disobedience. Our partisans will act, but at that time we'll be maybe more prepared, because in 2020 our revolution was like from hearts of people. We didn't build any organizations, to uprise. It was like people's intention, but now we are building democratic institutions. Yes, most of them are in exile because Lukashenko's regime made hundreds of thousands of people flee Belarus because of repressions. But now we are communicating more effectively between people. We are building structures. We are in constant communication and coordination with people who are in Belarus. So we managed to create a coalition of countries who are supporting us. And maybe back in 2020, the response of democratic countries wasn't on time. For example, first sanctions package was adopted only in 6 months after the fraudulent elections. And I think if people of Belarus felt more support, strong steps from the Western countries at the beginning of uprising, we would be more efficient at that time. But, we can't, of course, blame anybody. We maybe made our own mistakes, ourselves. But I think that, again, now it's important not to overlook Belarus, to raise awareness about our country. My task is to explain the importance of Belarus in our region for future peace and stability. And we explain that without free Belarus, there will be constant threat to Ukraine, to our all neighbors. And while Lukashenko is there will be constant violation of international laws, violation of Belarusian people's rights. So we ask the world, democratic world, to stay with us, not to leave Belarus for one day later, maybe when you deal with Ukraine, and to declare that Belarus is important, that Belarus is a part of European family of countries. Belarusian people deserve to live in a democratic and free and sovereign country.
Thank you. Yes, I think you're quite right that the West was in many ways unprepared, that Belarus had been classified as kind of the last dictatorship in Europe, and there wasn't the sense that there would be this popular upswell. And so it took people in the West a little bit of time to adjust to the fact that this was really happening. And in that respect, the movement was a great success in convincing Europeans and those here in Washington that Belarus had a democratic future. That it shouldn't just be written off in the way that people were beginning to write off Russia, for example, that Belarus sort of established itself as part of that democratic Europe and willing to make sacrifices and fight for it. And so I think in that regard, I think we'll be more ready going forward.
Yeah, I hope so. Since 2020, we are rediscovering new Belarus for the world, because for many years, Belarus was perceived as part or appendix of Russia. And in 2020, we showed that we are not the same as, especially actually after the war, we showed that we are not the same as Russians. We are anti-war people, we are peaceful people, and our future is in Europe. And so that's why we are asking our partners to show Belarusian people European perspectives, to punish regime, but to help Belarusian people to fight. And yeah, I think that we deprived Lukashenko's regime a lot of political space on international arena. Lukashenko is unshakable. He is not recognized as a leader of Belarus. He is like politically isolated. And instead, we are building or we are institutionalizing our relationship with different international organizations, and voice of real Belarusians is heard.
We certainly see a lot more of you in these parts than we do of Alexander Lukashenko, so it's an important signal. If I could turn to a discussion of the war, you've mentioned it a couple times in your remarks so far. Belarus is playing an important role in the war on some level for staging of Russian forces. They, announced, as you mentioned, that they're going to be putting tactical nuclear weapons on the Iskander missile platforms in Belarus by this summer, perhaps. But Belarus is also playing an important role in disrupting the war. And we have seen, even though there's official governmental support from the Lukashenko regime, there is also resistance at the popular level, and Belarusian forces have not been engaged in fighting. Why do you think that is? Both, why do you think that Belarus has not gotten more actively involved as a Russian ally in the war? And also, if you could say, I don't know, I don't want you to breach confidentiality or disclose classified information, but if you could tell us anything about the role of the Belarusian partisans and their activities in disrupting Russian efforts to invade Ukraine and in the war, I think we'd all be very interested to hear about that.
First of all, I have to say that the world has to distinguish Belarusian regime and Belarusian people. Lukashenko and his cronies became full accomplice in this war. Lukashenko became puppet of the regime. He fulfills all the orders Putin is given to Lukashenko, because Lukashenko knows that he lost support of Belarusian people. He, as I said, he's unshakable in the international world, and his only ally is Putin. And he has to show loyalty for his political and economical backup. But Belarusian people, 86% of Belarusians are against participation of Belarus in this war. And when the war has started, anti-war movement was launched in Belarus. And all it happened, I want to remind you, in the atmosphere of total repressions in Belarus, when people can be detained for years and years in prison for just like of the tweet or post anti-regime post on I don't know, Instagram. People have been living under constant threat for a year and a half before the war started. But despite of this, people found strength to go out to anti-war rally. At that day, 1,000 people have been detained by the regime. Then our partisan movement appeared from nowhere. We even don't know who those people are. And our partisans disrupted railways to slow down or stop Russian equipment going through our country to deliver this equipment to Russian forces in Ukraine. It helped Ukrainians, to be ready for the situation and counterattack the invasion. Many people who participated in these acts of sabotage might be sentenced to death penalty in Belarus. Then, after the beginning of the war, people's intelligence appeared in Belarus. Ordinary people took pictures of Russian equipment, Russian troops, Russian soldiers, and sent this information to Ukrainian army for them to be prepared for possible attacks. And of course, all those people who are catched because of these pictures, they're sentenced again to years and years in jail. Now, not only those people who are opposing the regime, but also those who are opposing the war became the enemies of this regime. One young guy donated 20 euros to Ukrainian army. He was sentenced to 5 years in jail. young lady was singing Ukrainian song, 2 years in jail. So this is how regime answers the anti-Ukrainian, anti-war moods of Belarusian people. Recently, very expensive surveillance airplane was blew up by Belarusian partisans. This plane played important role for Russian army. It could be used, to attack, to attack Ukraine, and now it was sent back to Russia for repairing. After each act of sabotage, after each act of disobedience in Belarus, a new level of repressions take place in our country. But about 17 people every day are being detained. Don't forget that people in Belarusian prisons, especially political prisoners, are ill-treated. They are humiliated physically, morally. They are deprived of communication with their relatives. A lot of relatives can't find their, husbands, wives, daughters for many, many days. I don't know the fates of the people. So, but these acts, show that our movement is alive, that we create this constant stress for Belarusian regime, and Lukashenko knows that if he stops this repression for a day, people will uprise again. He's afraid of people. He's afraid of peaceful people. The fact that Belarusian army is not participating in the war is not the merit of Lukashenko. When sometimes I hear from politicians that Putin puts pressure on Lukashenko, that he has to send his troops to the war, and as if Lukashenko is resisting, it's a wrong perception. Lukashenko is fully on the side of Putin. But Lukashenko and Putin knows that Belarusian army doesn't want to participate in this war, that Belarusian soldiers don't want to die or kill for the ambitions of two usurpers. And the Russian army can't trust Belarusian army because even in case if this order is given, our soldiers would defect, would change sides, will lay down the weapon, would escape, but will not will not participate in this war. And moreover, I think that this status quo in Belarus is comfortable for Putin and Lukashenko. Putin has a very cheap ally in the face of Putin. He can upload the military forces, nuclear weapon, the aircrafts to launch missiles from Belarus, free, without any resistance from so-called government. So they can use each other to circumvent sanctions, and so what for? Putin has to destabilize already not stable situation in Belarus. What for to call to bring more sanctions to Belarus? So now Lukashenko plays the role of peacemaker, but he is not. He's fully responsible for the participation of Belarus in this war, and he has to share the full responsibility for this. And that's why we are calling our partners to launch investigations against Lukashenko for his crimes against humanity and crimes of aggression in Ukraine, and use all the possible mechanisms in ICC, ICJ, universal jurisdiction to not to leave Lukashenko this feeling of impunity.
I think it's a very interesting point that in some ways, the opposition movement always remains a shadow over Lukashenko, that he can't take certain actions because he knows that there's broad resistance to his regime and it's very fragile. And so something like engaging in an unpopular war against a fellow Slavic neighbor would possibly be the sort of thing that would lose him the support of the general staff, even of the military, and could bring the regime down. And so in that way, your movement and the continued role that you play is playing a really important role, I think, in reducing Russia's capability in Ukraine and sort of pushing back against Russian aggression. Quite interesting.
Yeah. I just wanted us to say that our tasks also is to split elites inside Belarus. And in 2020, we saw many defections of Belarusian military people and people of state institutions. They saw that Lukashenko is making awful things and they didn't want to be part of this. And till now, we know we are getting inside information from nomenclatura, from elites, from military institutions. That means that a lot of people inside the regime are on our side, but they, they're afraid to be vocal. They're afraid for their lives, for the lives of their family. I'm sure that, what I want to say that Lukashenko is also afraid of this. He's afraid of internal betrayal. That's why he recently adopted a law that allows him to bring to death penalty those people who, according to him, committed state treason. So and anybody in Belarus can be blamed in state treason at the moment. So he wants to keep people around him at least visibly loyal, and he has very small group of people whom he can betray, but he knows that people from elites, they see that Lukashenko leads our country to dead end. There is no future with the Lukashenko's regime. And I think that in the next point, during the next window of opportunities, we will have more allies from elites and from military institutions.
It's very hard when he came to power in 1994, and he was a relatively young man then, but he and Putin are both of this much older generation now. And as Dean Hayter pointed out, there's a generational shift that's going on, which favors people with ambitions to have a European future for Belarus. And now you've been meeting with European leaders for the last couple of years, but especially in the last year. I follow you on Twitter, so I see you really have quite a number of high-level meetings. And I'm wondering what your vision is for, sort of once that generation goes, and assuming that you will on some level be successful in bringing Belarus back into a democratic Europe. What's your vision for the future of Belarus in Europe, and what the kind of future of Europe would look like with Belarus in it? And then we'll open it up to questions from the floor. Thanks.
Back in 2020, there was no geopolitical choice for Belarusian people. Our fight was absolutely internal one, and at that moment, there wasn't like a question to choose between East and West. We wanted to dismantle the regime. Though, of course, pro-European views were very popular among Belarusians because we absolutely sure that Belarus can be a prosperous country. Back in the 1990s, Belarus and Poland started from the same point of development. We were post-Soviet Union countries, and now we see where Poland now is, prosperous, wonderful country, and where Belarus is fully subjugated, to Russia. It happened because of poor management of the country, the government that didn't take care about people's prosperity, only about their own interests. And of course, the war has changed a lot in people's set of mind. Now, for Belarusian people, Russia means war and poverty, while the West means prosperity and peace. And of course, our choice is evident. We are choosing European perspective of development. Of course, the question of participation in the European Union or NATO is up to Belarusian people and can be seen only after free referendum in our country. I can't speak on behalf of all Belarusians at the moment on these issues, but of course now we are installing relationship with the European institutions like Council of Europe, for example, because we see ourselves as part of European family of countries, and of course the war brought many challenges to European security. And we see that without Belarus, there cannot be stable and peaceful Europe. So that's why, again, I always underline the meaning of peace, peaceful, free and democratic Belarus in this new peaceful architecture of Europe. But to inspire people, to show people that you are important, you have to show European perspectives for Belarusian people. That's why when we communicate to our partners, we say punish the regime, but help people. Don't close the borders for Belarusian people. We have a right to travel, to educate in international institutions, universities, because we will need new leaders, new professionals who will, bring our country to democratic changes. And I see, the signs that we are welcomed. The war might change a little bit, especially at the beginning. Some controversial decisions were made by some governments, like visa ban on all Belarusians. Like we managed to correct this perception, especially for Ukrainians. And now we are building relationship with democratic countries, showing that only only democratic Belarus can be guarantor of stability in our region. And I see that a lot of countries, a lot of governments, and you say, including, want to help us. Maybe democratic world doesn't have enough instruments to deal with dictators, because dictators abuse all the international laws, but still we have to be creative, we have to be inventive, we have to look for non-conventional approaches in this situation. And I see how the world is changing, how the world's perception of Russia is changing. But again, I always underline, don't forget about Belarus. Don't leave Belarus as consolation prize for Putin, because I will repeat, without free and democratic Belarus, there cannot be peace and stability in the whole region.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So let's open it up to our audience members. I think if you just come, Kay, do you want people to come up to the mic? Yeah, so if you just come up to the mic, we'll take your questions.
Good morning. My name is Justin Stewart. I'm a sophomore at the School of International Service. My question is, as someone that has led a democratic movement against an authoritarian leader like Lukashenka, what is your message to those in other authoritarian countries who feel too intimidated to speak out against the government? Thank you.
I'm so sorry. Can you please repeat a little bit slower?
Yes, I'm sorry. As someone that has led a democratic movement against an authoritarian leader like Lukashenko, what is your message to those in other authoritarian countries who feel too intimidated to speak out against the government?
I think that there is a deep intention inside any nation who is fighting with the dictatorial regimes to save their country, to become, democratic and prosperous state. You just have to fight. There is no silver bullet, for getting rid of the regime. Any country can use specific instruments, to create multiple points of pressure on the regime. But I think that only deep belief will bring your country to change. I think that all those who are fighting against dictatorship should unite, at least informationally, to share their expertise, what methods or tools are effective or successful, to give opportunity for others to use the same instrument.
All right, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for being here. Of course, I don't know enough about the issue, but I was checking some polls, which I know are limited. I grew up in Venezuela, so I know sometimes polls don't say the whole story. But an interesting poll by the Center of Eastern Studies and another by the British think tank Chatham House suggested that in 2020, 60% of Belarusians had a positive view of the Russian president. That has changed, of course, recently. But what I did see in the polls was some indifference in regard to Russian troops being in Belarus. Most Belarusians are opposed to Belarusian troops being involved in the conflict, but not a lot of them seem to be necessarily opposed to having the Russians there. Do you think those polls don't say the complete story? If so, what else don't we know?
I want to repeat that since 2020, the perception of this United States with Russia is changing among Belarusian people. Just imagine, for 28 years, we lived in the country that was very close to Russia. Our old generation, generation of our parents went from Soviet Union, and they might have some nostalgia about the young years. There were so many good things, but also were so many bad things about Soviet Union. But people are cherishing their memories. But new generation grew up, and they can't share the vision of their parents on our past. A new generation of people want more prosperous future for Belarus, and they see that it's impossible in this unity with Russia. They had opportunity to travel. They had opportunity to study in foreign universities, and they see that Belarus having wonderful geographical position, having wonderful people, can become prosperous country that is not that isn't dependent on Russia. And the only person who is the most pro-Soviet Union person in our country is Lukashenka. He's always dragging our country back into the past, while Belarusian people are looking into the future, and this future without war, the future without poverty, the future without influence of Russian wishes. We don't want to. We want to be separate, independent, sovereign states, and we see that imperialistic ambitions of Russia doesn't want to allow us, to be independent state. But we have to fight for this. And back in 2020, we saw many people of our parents' age, people of Soviet Union who were on the streets. So we see how even the generation is changing their minds.
Hello, Sviatlana. Thank you for coming here. You're an absolute inspiration. And my question is that what kind of support would be ideal right now from Western countries to support and boost the wind of new opportunities that you mentioned? Belarus.
Thank you. What we are asking now from our partners is to be at least consistent. If you didn't recognize Lukashenko as leader, don't communicate to him. Don't send ambassadors to Minsk. Don't invite representatives of the regime to international events, not to hear this lie from them. Instead, work with people from democratic movements, from democratic forces. It will take this political space from the regime, and it influences, as I said before, on the opinions of people who are in this regime, that there is no future with Lukashenko. They're always waiting on his side power is. And they see that democratic forces are recognized as legitimate, that democratic forces representatives are in international institutions, like recently Council of Europe launched contact group with the democratic Belarus, where they're discussing essential problems and future of our country. And we are asking to stick to this two-sided approach towards regime, punish the regime, impose all the possible sanction pressure on them, isolate them politically, economically, but also support people. We, people of Belarus, need energy to continue our fight. We see that we can't deal with Lukashenko's regime without support and solidarity. We see that all the NGOs inside our country have been liquidated. All the media, alternative media in Belarus have been ruined. Yes, they managed to restore their activity in exile, but they need assistance. We need assistance to our human rights defenders centers who are taking care of political prisoners. The number of political prisoners in our country is about 5,000 people. Don't forget about hundreds of thousands who had to flee Belarus. So provide them with the easy way for legislation in different countries, help them to get documents without going back to Ukraine, because now a lot of people's passports can be expired and they have to return to Belarus to renew their passports, and they can't do this because they will be for sure detained for years and years in prison. Now we are developing this idea of new Belarusian passports, and we are asking for support of our allies. There are a lot of problems Belarusian people face being in exile and in the country, but when they feel this support, when they feel this eagerness to help us solve our problems, they have more time and inspiration to continue. We are not asking to make changes in Belarus instead of us, but help us to do it ourselves. Also, we think that this feeling of impunity in the regime should be broken. Can I say so? As I said before, use all the possible mechanisms to show Lukashenko and his cronies that they will be punished for the crimes against people, crimes of aggression against Ukraine, migration crisis, hijacking of Ryanair flight, because now when regime feels this silence on this behalf, they can do whatever they want. And of course, these firm, decisive steps are needed. Now, we see now that dictators are making this new alliance, Russia, Belarus, China, Iran, and the democratic world has to stay united as never before. And consistency is, and unity is our power. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Helen Suki-Reyes, and I'm a student here at SIS. First of all, I want to thank the President-elect for being here, first of all, and also for not only showing hope and resistance for Belarus people, but also demonstrating and being a sign of democratic values for other regimes that have been under, or other nations that have been under autocratic regimes for generations. My question goes more into some sort of wishful thinking in the hopes that the invasion of Ukraine ends up with a success on the Ukrainian side and diminishing the power of Russia in the region, thinking how that can affect Belarus and the influence of Russia and Belarus. What can be the next steps if we see the diminishing of the power of Russia in the region? And also, if that were the case, that there can be democratic steps to be followed in Belarus, what is more expected from you and from the Belarus people from the EU specifically, not only thinking about the possibility of EU membership, but also in the sense of, since the Ukraine is probably definitely is gonna get state building support and reconstruction support, is something that also are you expecting from EU, or what kind of policies do you expect from them?
Thank you for the question. Of course, the fates of Belarus and Ukraine are intertwined. We are facing the same enemy, imperialistic ambitions of Russia, and we have to collaborate, to work together now for the future of both our countries. We understand that the victory of Ukraine, and for sure they will win, will open new window of opportunities for Belarusian people. And we are not just sitting and waiting when Ukraine will win this fight, but we are preparing for this. We are helping Ukrainian people as much as we can in our very difficult situation. You know that hundreds of Belarusian military volunteers are fighting on the side of Ukrainians at the moment. Our Belarusian refugees who are refugees themselves are helping to Ukrainian refugees, because we know what it means, you know, to grab your child, to grab your cat, and leave the country, leaving everything behind. And also, victory of Ukraine means weaken Russia. Weaken Russia means weaken Lukashenka. And again, it will be like process. And we will need to catch this window and uprise again. You know, as I said before, we will be prepared for that moment. But also, changes in Belarus can come even earlier. And it might be the burst support for Ukraine, and free and democratic Belarus will be the best sanctions against Putin. So that's why we are asking, to have a firm stance on Belarus. And as for the future of Belarus, of course, we are in the process of fighting, but we're also thinking about our future. We are preparing, we are working on future reforms in our country in different areas. And of course, we all need support. And already the European Union adopted a comprehensive plan for Belarus, which will provide us with billions of euros for restoring our country, for holding reforms. And we ask the USA to follow this example and include Belarus and Moldova into big Marshall Plan. Now, this Marshall Plan is preparing only about Ukraine, to restore cities. Of course, it's priority, but to have stable countries around Ukraine are also very important. So Belarus and Moldova should be included in development of this plan. Thank you.
Hello, Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya. It's wonderful to have you. Thank you for coming here. My name is Paul Thorne-Kazaya. I'm a graduate student here in the School of International Service. My question is somewhat connected with Russia. That we saw in 2020 that the uprisings that happened were only stopped really from Moscow, from Putin coming and intervening. And if we assume that there is a democratic Belarus, but Putin is still in power in Russia, what would that look like as far as relations between Belarus and Putin, Belarus and EU? How is so to avoid the kind of ownership mentality that is now happening in Ukraine, where a lot of Russians are saying that the West is taking Ukraine away from us. If Belarus became democratic, I'm sure the feeling would, again, people would be thinking that Belarus is being pulled away from Russia. Is there any work being done in Russia with ordinary citizens to kind of prepare people for that situation so that Putin would not be able to call people and just try to invade Belarus? Or is there a way to form good relationships if Putin is still in power, but there is a democratic Belarus?
Look, it's a difficult question how to deal with Russia that is still has Putin in power, or next person who knows who has imperialistic ambitions. People in Russia have to change their perception of post-Soviet Union countries. They have to understand that every sovereign country has its own right to choose their future. It's not necessary for them to stay in the orbit of influence of Russia. You have to get rid of this understanding and perception. And it's a pity to see that Russian people are in huge amount are still supporting Putin as the president. They are supporting this war. So with this Russia, I don't see any future.
But of course, we are explaining to Russian people through media our point of view. We explain that you can't influence our decisions. And I think that Belarus should be get out of all the agreements with Russia that have been made against Belarusian people's will. It's the same question, can be asked to Ukrainians, how they are going to deal with Russia in the future. But our task, I think that Russia can't influence the countries who has very strong national identity. For 28 years, Russia influenced a lot our culture, our economy, our art, as I said in my speech. But now, after 2020, it's the same happened in 2014 in Ukraine. We are strengthening our national identity. We started to study our history. More people speak Belarusian language. Now Belarusian language is almost forbidden in Belarus. People for speaking Belarusian language can be detained for years in jail or for reading Belarusian books. Belarusian books are actually confiscated from bookshelves of Belarusian bookshops. So Lukashenko is trying to suppress Belarusian identity, and we have to strengthen this. So I don't know if you can influence the mind of Russians. Our task is to unite Belarusian people around them cherishing our old Belarusness and relationship with the European countries.
Okay, exactly.
Thank you. Exactly.
Hi, I'm Helen. I'm a grad student. And my question is about your views on a post-Lukashenka Belarus. I wrote about the aftermath of the 2020 election back in 2021 for one of Dr. Darden's classes. And two of the things that I learned were about the sheer size of Belarus's bureaucracy, and also that one of the primary points of unity for the opposition is just being against Lukashenka. So I was wondering if you had any insights or could foresee any issues with either political fragmentation or infrastructural capacity once Lukashenko is ousted and Belarus can transition to democracy.
So as I said, now we are working for future of our country. We are working on different reforms. We are working on new constitution in Belarus. It's not just, our people are writing this. We are consulting with the Venice Commission in Europe for them to evaluate this constitution. For sure, our aim is to change our country from a super presidential republic to parliamentary presidential or parliament. It's up to people to decide, but we have to have all these documents ready because we will have very short transitional period from dismantling the regime to new free and fair elections where, the necessary laws has to be adopted that will not allow dictatorship to repeat in our country. And we are working with different specific international organizations who are helping us with the reforms in different spheres, with green economy, with businesses. I want to say that a lot of businesses have been closed back in 2020 because our businessmen went against Lukashenko's regime, and now they had to relocate and they're building their businesses abroad. But most of them are ready to return to Belarus and work for prosperity of our country. Now, we can't do a lot now inside Belarus because of repressions, but we can do a lot outside. But I see that people are not giving up. They are building the structures. They are fighting to one day return to Belarus and continue restoring our country there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Charlotte. Thank you so much for coming. You talked on this a bit earlier, but I wanted to ask about like cultural identity, and obviously Russia has created almost like this cultural imperialism within post-Soviet nations. How do you begin to reconcile a Belarus that moves more towards Europe and Belarus that is still has long-lasting remnants of Russian cultural imperialism? So how do you continue to strengthen the Belarusian identity as being separate from Russian influence?
Yeah, if I could clarify it a little bit, is, Belarus has historically had a very close relationship with Russia and a lot of history and common culture, on this, similarly in the struggle against the Nazis in World War II, which is a huge feature of Belarusian identity, also that Soviet component of Belarusian identity. But nonetheless, people care quite a bit about Masharov and the partisans during the Second World War. So what happens? How do you kind of pull Belarus away from Russia culturally when it has those strong ties? And Ukraine's struggled with this as well. I mean, Belarus is not alone in its post-imperial struggles to define itself against Russia.
In 2020, a lot of educational initiatives appeared that study or teach our people about Belarusian history, about Belarusian culture, about Belarusian language, because, I myself, a person of post-Soviet Union era, I myself can speak Belarusian language only because my grandparents were speaking this language. I remember in school we paid so little attention to Belarusian poetry, to Belarusian history. It wasn't interesting, for us because of this influence of Russian culture and Russian language on our society. And I know that it might take decades, to restore Belarusian, understanding in Belarusian people of importance of strong national identity, of to learn Russian culture and Russian piece of art the same as Germans or UK's culture is like separate. It's not it's theirs. They, those prominent people deserve to be studied, but they're not ours. We have to cherish, first of all, our poets, our writers, our artists. And I see, 2.5 years, and I see such a huge shift in realizing of Belarusian people how it is important. And we deliver these messages to our children, and they will be more pro-Belarusian people than our generation. And we are studying actually with them. Through constant learning, through constant repeating, through showing that Russian culture is important, but it is not ours. Thank you.
Добрый день, Светлана Tsikhanouskaya. Спасибо большое, что вы пришли, выступили сегодня. Since the Soviet Union collapsed, Ukraine has always had this negative sentiment towards Russia, and Belarus, until as of recent, hasn't had that same strong opposition. Why do you think there was that distinction between Belarus and Ukraine towards Russia?
Distinction?
He's suggesting that there's more of a connection, that Belarusians see more of a connection with Russia than Ukrainians do, that there was a stronger Ukrainian national identity than a Belarusian national identity.
Recall Ukraine before 2014. There was a huge influence of Russia on the culture, on the nation. And in 2014, they had this Maidan. They showed the pro-European perspective. And, it was strengthening. The same happened in Belarus only in 2020. We had groups of people with strong national identity, but majority of Belarusians haven't heard these groups. I was among them, I fully understand what it means. But we are in the process that Ukrainians went through already, and we are showing to Ukrainians that we are not the same as Russians regarding the war, at least, and we are studying from Ukrainians how to strengthen the national identity. We're repeating the same process, and it always unexpected for international societies to hear that Belarusian and Ukrainian languages are very similar. We understand each other without any interpretation, while Belarusian and Russian language is rather different. So we are, as nations, much closer to each other. Belarusians and Ukrainians are much closer to each other than one might think. But because of this Russian empire influence on both our countries, we maybe lost this connection. But we have to restore it, we have to strengthen it, and to show each other that our future in Europe as separate independent countries, but we need to keep good relationship between our nations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Maggie Locker, and I'm currently a sophomore at the School of International Service. It's such an honor to hear you speak today. I wanted to get your perspective on the recent news that Putin wants to station tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. While there is no absolute guarantee that Putin will follow through on this plan, how might this affect Belarus's perceived role in the Ukraine war, as well as the continued protests against Lukashenko?
Of course, this declaration of deploying of nuclear weapon in Belarus is absolutely against our institution and against the will of Belarusian people. This deployment is aiming in subjugating Belarusian nation, Belarusian people. It abuses our international security, and I want to hear the strong position of democratic countries regarding, this deployment. We don't know if it's only psychological operation or it will be fulfilled. Now we are watching closely, our people's intelligence inside Belarus watching closely if this restoring of this nuclear ядерных хранилищ. How? Silence? Silos? Oh, nuclear silos are going on. But of course, it's very disturbing because Belarus might be a target for possible attacks on Belarus, and Lukashenko for sure will not control this. It means that, Putin, as I said, subjugating more and more Belarus. And these steps shouldn't be tolerated from our international partners. And we are waiting for strong reaction on this. And the second question?
How might this, possible plan impact continued protests against Lukashenko?
Our protests, don't depend on declarations of Putin and Lukashenko. We know that we have to defend our independence, our serenity, our people who sacrificed their freedom, their lives, for the future Belarus. But I think it's like alarm for the world to be more decisive, to be more active regarding Belarus. As I said, don't leave Belarus for one day later. We informed our partners about such possibility of deploying of nuclear weapon. It was treated as non-essential issue then, but now it's on the surface. So we are waiting for action. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And why don't we group the remaining questions? Let's take a couple at a time, and then because I think we're going to have to close relatively soon. Yeah.
Здравствуйте, Светлана Тsikhanouskaya. У меня такой вопрос. Firstly, I want to say that I admire your strength and courageous to stand for Belarus nation and advocate for their rights in European countries, because now you're like a leader of Belarusian nation and you can advocate what benefit of them to change the situation. And when the protests happened in Belarus, I hope that this situation will change, will bring democratic changes in Russia, because it will be catalyst of situation in all region, in whole region. And so now the situation with war, and especially now when in Russia there is no when the opposition is in prison, especially leader of opposition Navalny, he's in prison and he cannot advocate for Russian people abroad. So I think that it's kind of the same situation that Russians are isolated with Putin, and Putin keep the Russians as hostages, and now he can manipulate these people. I'm very happy that you are in European countries can advocate for Belarusian people, and I hope this will bring democratic changes in Belarus. Yeah, and but I think how is it possible that if the Russians doesn't have has restrictions from European countries, visa countries, some countries doesn't accept Russians anymore? How is it possible that Russians will have some way to maneuver to change the situation, to get education, to or later come and have some alternatives to Putin? Because when Putin keep everyone in his country only, it means that that there's no alternatives to his regime. So my question is it possible to somehow to change situation if how you see the changes if sorry, I'm lost.
Is your question essentially, how does sanctioning Russia help change in Russia?
No, because I see that in Belarus, in order to change the situation in Belarus, there have to be changes also in Russia, because Russia Putin supports Lukashenka. And
all right, let's take the next question. We'll couple these questions, and so if you could hand the mic to the, I think we've got the. Do you get the gist? Yeah.
Добрый день, спасибо, что вы пришли с вами говорить. So my question for you is that I know that some people are, especially including members of my family, are concerned about Western involvement in the region. And as you mentioned, that Lukashenko is somewhat of a puppet for Russia. So there is concern that the future puppeteer of Belarusian leadership would be a Western power. Do you believe this is a valid concern? And if so, how can protection of Belarusian sovereignty be kept, especially as there are varying degrees of Western support provided? So yeah, thank
you. Is the question essentially how can we bolster Belarusian sovereignty?
So with the threat of kind of a leadership being in a sense of puppet, how can
how do we bolster Belarusian sovereignty when the official sovereign of the country is a puppet of Russia? Yeah.
All right. I would like to ask about the recent arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin that was issued by the ICC about 2 weeks ago. Is your movement and your team looking to issue something similar against Lukashenko for his actions against the Belarusian people following the 2020 elections?
Good afternoon. My name is Anastasia Badyuk. I'm Ukrainian. I want to use this opportunity to thank you, Sviatlana, and all those people in Belarus who are resisting Russia's unlawful aggression against Ukraine. Thank you. Живе Беларусь, слава Украине. If I may, I would like to ask for your advice. As an aspiring young person with dreams and ambitions in the field of politics, I'm often concerned about psychological manipulations and potential threats to my family's safety if I were to get deeply involved in the field of politics. I'm sure that many people in this room have similar concerns: blackmail, threats, disclosure of personal information, false accusations. All this can scare young people away from politics. But for those who don't get scared easily and are still willing to give it a shot, what advice would you give us to mitigate these factors, deal with them more effectively, psychologically, and just function effectively even under such pressure? Thank you.
Good afternoon, President-elect. My question is on Belarus athletes and what role do they play in Belarus's future, given the Lukashenko family's hegemony over the Olympic Committee?
Hi, thank you for the speech and the discussion. I'm a reporter with Voice America. So you mentioned about alignment of Russia, Belarus, and China. So I wonder, how do you see the relationship of Belarus and China, especially Belarus under Lukashenko is getting closer to China? And you also mentioned that we should differentiate between Belarusian regime and Belarusian people. So how do Belarusian people view its country's relationship with China? Thank you.
Thank you. And you can take whatever pieces of those questions. I think it's good to give everyone an opportunity to ask, since we were running out of time, and just take whatever pieces of that you want to draw into your closing comments. That would be wonderful.
So first of all, I would like to answer the question about Russian opposition and Belarusian opposition, as you call us. So I want to say that Belarusians and Russians, Belarus and Russia has different context, at least regarding the war. You know, I already told in my answers that it's easy to see that most of Russians are supporting this, as they call it, special military operation. In Belarus, you will never see this Z or V signs on the streets of our cities, never. You will never see pro-war slogans among our people. And we see this in Russia. We know that according to the polls, Russians are still supporting their president, Putin. In our country, it's absolutely different. Most of Belarusians are not supporting Lukashenko and his policy, and they showed it in 2020. On some levels, we are dealing with the Russian opposition in exile. We are sharing our expertise, our methods or tools, you know, how to fight with these regimes. Of course, maybe, you know, it's not easier, but, you know, maybe easier for us to advocate for Belarus because we have chosen leader in our country, and people gave me this mandate to speak on behalf of Belarusian people, and I will be with people until people need me. But I'm not going, you know, to advocate for the Russians. It is their duty. If there are consensus among society that they need changes in Russia, they will show it. Not maybe on the streets, because it's also might be dangerous in Russia, but at least through media. But we don't hear this. Now we have a lot of instruments in media how to express opinions, YouTube, different channels. But we see this war moods among Russian society. I'm sorry, but my duty is Belarus, and we communicating with opposition in Russia, but we are not going to be the voice of Russian people. That's why we always underline to our partners, separate Belarus and Russia. Don't put us into one basket. Don't say, I don't know, sanctions against Russia and Belarus. Look us separately. And I see that now this perception is changing, and when the laws are launched in some countries about legislation, for example, about legalization of dissidents, they're separate for Russians and separate for Belarusians. As for threats to the families of those who are involved in politics in difficult times, there was no one day since 2020 that I haven't thought about safety of my children, safety of my family, especially safety of my husband who is in jail. You understand that he's a hostage, and any your action can cause troubles and difficulties for him. They are already in an extremely difficult situation, but the regime can put people in punishment cells, to deprive them of food or fresh air. But you understand that only fighting, you can release those people. If you, because of being afraid of consequences for your family, if it will stop you, so everything will stop. And it's not only about me, it's all about those people who are continuing their fight. And those relatives who are extremely afraid, they might also relocate. My parents are still in Belarus, and I'm calling them every evening, are you okay? What's going on? Just because I understand that this is a leverage that can influence on, that regime thinks can influence me. But just giving up will not solve Belarusian problem. So, or you're going till the end and release Belarus as a country, or you just stop and release no people, no country. As for our athletes, our sportsmen in 2020, a lot of people from sport went also to the streets and signed the letter of sportsmen against Lukashenka. A lot of athletes have been kicked out from their sbornych, from their teams, and our free sportsmen organized fund for sports solidarity, and they are working with the Olympic Committee, with other sports institutions, to advocate for Belarusian free sportsmen. And I would welcome the decision of international sports events not invite pro-regime athletes to any championships, but instead invite those who are fighting with this regime. Because when I hear that sport is outside of politics, is it correct expression? Sport is out of politics. No, the times are different now. Now everything is in politics, and you can't treat sportsmen who are supporting brutality, terror, and the violence in our country. You can't invite them on a championship, because sports has to unite, but you can't unite with people who are supporting terrorism. And the last question is about China. Of course, China holds its separate geopolitical game. And as for relationship with Belarus, it was fully always like economical or trade relationship. After 2020, China stopped many projects in Belarus because they are rather pragmatic. They don't want to invest into a country that is not stable. Now the visit of Lukashenka to China holds more like political character, because he's looking for legitimacy, he's looking for like support. Maybe they could have some deals about producing weapon, for example, in Belarus, or maybe he was selling our enterprises to China because he's lack of money now. But people in Belarus at least, before 2020, they were not too involved into this China-Belarusian relationship. We were rather passive about this, but now it's more about moral perception. If you deal with country that supports war or supports Russia in this war, so you can't deal with this country. And our task is to explain Belarusian people what's going on, at least because in the past nobody was consulting to people, asking their opinion. And our task is to educate Belarusians inside Belarus, what's going on, about peculiarities of the relationship. But again, while China, Russia, and Belarusian regime, Iran are uniting, democratic countries should unite even more because dictatorships understand only their language of force, of power, and democracy has to show its teeth.
Thank you very much for those inspiring comments. Thank you. And you're welcome back at the School of International Service at any time, especially after you take on your rightful role as president of a free Belarus.
Thank you.
Thank you. Amazing.
You want me to? You guys, we have an opportunity to take pictures informally.